And thank you, Jillian. And the to that legislation made some significant changes in what had been being done since the legislation that I think originally passed in maybe 2003, which was verse requirements for water supply planning that grew out of the droughts of the early 2000s that really hit the Culpeper Orange County area as hard as any part of the state. The original legislation really was the first steps for Virginia to require water supply planning, and it would allow for a locality to do an individual local plan, or you could do a regional plan. And if you did a regional plan, it was whoever got together and wanted to declare themselves a region. Whereas the 2020 legislation required DEQ to establish regions. They had to be kind of oriented towards basins, but not absolutely the case. And the regions would be specifically defined, and they would be hard boundaries. There was subsequent legislation that allowed for, once those were put in place, if a particular locality wanted to move to a different region, there was a process established to do that. And the regulations have been through the entire process and are on the verge of being presented to the Water Control Board. They've been signed off by the AG's office, signed off by DPB, and signed off by the governor's office. And according to my conversation with Whedon Clow last week, that presentation of the Water Control Board will be on the 30th of this month. I did a quick check this morning. I didn't see that it had yet been posted, although I may have missed it. I didn't dig real hard. Whedon and then Hannah Summers will both be at the River Basin Commission meeting here in a couple weeks to talk about these regulations and the moving into the planning process for the next set of cycles. And I believe it's a 10-year cycle. You're gonna have to update each 10 years. The regulations have enhanced outreach requirements. I'm not going to go into the details of that. I'm going to leave that to Whedon talking to the commission at the next meeting. PDCs are encouraged to participate, but the way I read it, Chip, and you may read it differently, is that's about as far as it goes. They're not mandated, but it is specifically stated that they're encouraged. And what I would like to do today is give an opportunity to those that are on this call to talk about, have you been having any discussions? Any talk about how you're going to work with those that you're required to be working with? And what are some of your concerns and the issues? According to 9 VAC 25-780-45, which designates the regional planning areas, the Rappahannock is covered by 5 of the planning areas. You've got, starting with planning areas 11 through 15. You've got the North Coastal Plain 1, which is Lancaster, Northumberland, Richmond, and Westmoreland. Of course, Northumberland's not in the Rappahannock, but the other 3 are. A Northern Coastal Plain 2, which is Essex, King and Queen, Matthews, and Middlesex. Essex and Middlesex being Rappahannock. Northern Coastal Plain 3, which is Caroline and King George. Northern Piedmont 1, which is effectively the Rappahannock-Rapidan Regional Commission boundaries. And then Northern Piedmont 2, which is Spotsy, Stafford, and the city of Fredericksburg. So George Washington Regional Commission kind of spans 2 planning areas, and Northern Coastal Plain 1 is Northern Neck PDC. Northern Coastal Plain 2 is part of the Middle Peninsula PDC. And with that, I fully expect, based on the discussion at the last commission meeting, that water supply planning, water availability, water allocation, if you go back to a term that takes us back to 2000 or so, is going to be a priority discussion in 2024. We're going to have major turnover of commission members. Matter of fact, we're preparing about a dozen awards for departing, retiring members, which is pretty significant. But some of the members that are staying, as well as at least one new member coming on who I've heard from, are all talking about water supply. With that, each of you had an interest in being part of this discussion, so I'm sure there's an interest there. I'm going to go back. Have you all had any discussions at the local levels?
Alden, this is Michelle Edwards. I think we've chatted a little bit about this. After the last River Basin Commission meeting, we had several of our county or town administrators and elected officials ask us about, water supply planning. We've since DEQ announced this, we've had county administrators ask us, constantly, when is this coming out? What are you doing? And we've told them, that we can't do anything until the final regs are passed and DEQ tells us what we need to do. But since our boundaries cover our PDC region, our intent is to coordinate the process with our localities, and they've all expressed interest in having us do this. The concerns following the River Basin Commission meeting was that somehow the River Basin Commission's discussions would somehow preempt our regional process. So that was really the only concern at this point that they had. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of, we're taking a wait and see approach, I'd say, but the intent is for our PDC to coordinate the process similar to what we did for DEQ's WIP 3 and the other WIPs.
Thank you, Michelle. That's helpful. Of course, I don't see the River Basin preempting anybody on anything. That's not really the role of the River Basin Commission. That's where we get the elected officials, both from the state and the local level, in the same room talking about a topic, and they can hear each other's perspectives.
Yeah.
And
I mean, this came strictly from people that were sitting in on the meeting and worried about it, but yes.
Well, it was quite a discussion. Which is
Eldon, we're at GWRC, we're very, very similar. I will say, because of, especially in the Caroline and King George area, we invited DEQ to speak, and I can't remember who Hannah's predecessor was, but he came and spoke, and then she also came and spoke. So this we've been following this for a while, but I would say that, which came up at your commission meeting most recently, the data centers has really pushed it to the front of the page for a number of areas, and our King George and Stafford and Caroline are very much in the front of that line, I believe, because water supply was already a problem for them. But so what we're doing is very similar to Michelle. We're going to begin meeting. We do have 2 basins within our PDC boundary. So for us, it's not only trying to facilitate the region by basin, but we are also exploring to see, is there any benefit for us to do one plan for both basins? Just an economy of scale. And not only that, but the Rappahannock runs through both. So it would be of benefit for Caroline and King George to at least somehow participate with the Stafford, Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg. The concern we've got too, which you and I and David Blunt have talked about, is if the PDCs do take a role of facilitation, and I don't have anything to back this up, it's just a guess, but I'm guessing some of the previous plans are probably have been prepared by the water suppliers. And the legislative review, when this was enacted, basically said that they do not anticipate any additional costs to be incurred with these regional plans. I do not think that's going to be the case, especially if there's more community engagement involved. The other is that whether the water suppliers may be doing their plans in-house or consulting out. If they're in-house, they probably don't have a direct budget for it. We don't know this yet, and this will come out in the conversations with our water suppliers. So for at least our PDC, of course, we don't have the money that Rappahannock has and Northern Virginia has, but for us, we would have to find some money to provide our staff time to even facilitate these types of discussions. And so that's a big concern we've got. We have already talked to at least one consulting firm, kind of what they would anticipate costs to be for developing a regional water supply plan like's been outlined. That's where we are.
Norm?
Hey, Eldon, this is Norm. I actually started gearing our folks up, probably about 2 years ago now. We tried to start gearing up right before the original, before the regs got modified. So we've put it on hold since that point of time. Just like Michelle said, we can't really do anything until we know exactly what the DEQ is going to be asking of for, even though we do have the draft regs. I will say one thing that I don't think you mentioned, but this time around, DEQ is not allowing for opt-outs. Every jurisdiction has to participate in some form of a regional plan. DEQ, as you know, since you were a member of the TAC like myself, we did work in that language that a jurisdiction could join another plan or participate in multiple plans with the permission of the entities involved. So I think that's a key point for what Chip was just talking about. You're going to have to go through that process to allow that to happen. We plan on doing it in-house again, just like we did. Well, actually, I take that back. Last time, we ended up having to contract out some of the work. I'm hoping that we'll be able to do it all in-house this time, but we've reserved that. We do bill this as a separate entity. It is above and beyond what the commission normally has in its work plan, so we bill appropriately for that. Now, I will say that we do loop in all of our water suppliers. They're all members of the advisory committee that we put together, so that we're all working hand in hand. Up in Northern Virginia, for the most part, the local governments really don't have any function in terms of water supply. All of our water suppliers are separate authorities. So in order for this to work, we've got no choice but to make sure we pull them all in at the same time. So it's a pretty comprehensive effort.
Well, now, Norm, before you go on, let me just clarify something. The localities really don't supply the water. It's authorities, which are by and large public sector, but it seems to me you've got some private suppliers up there too, right?
Yes, and we have Virginia Water America, which throws a little monkey wrench into this whole thing. The private water suppliers are not bound by this reg at all. As a matter of fact, none of the water authorities are bound by this reg at all. The reg focuses solely on the localities. But because our localities have this relationship with the authorities, it works. Now, the Monkey Wrench is the private. We had to somewhat strong arm them a little bit the last go around, and they supply water to the city of Alexandria. So the city of Alexandria had to apply a little bit of pressure to get their cooperation, and it worked. We ended up getting what we needed in the long run. But you're absolutely correct. When it comes to a private water supplier, they are not bound by this whatsoever and do not have to participate. But it's in their own interest now, to help. But we bill the cities. We don't bill the authorities for this work, because ultimately it's the jurisdictions that are responsible for this plan.
Okay. Others? All right. Brent, go ahead.
Eldon, if I could just add while it was the pause too, clearly this goes beyond just our Rappahannock area. And so all of the BAPDC is also, staying abreast of this, how it affects the entire state, just for whatever that's worth.
Okay. I appreciate that, Chip. Thank you.
Yeah, the other thing, Eldon, is I actually talked with Hannah, or emailed with Hannah just a week or two ago. And even though this is going to the State Water Control Board, it then has to move on to the executive review. And they have no time frame on that one right now. They're hoping to have this as an effective date sometime in September of 2024.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. I had not heard that timeline.
Yeah.
Okay. Pat, you got your hand raised. Pat, you're on mute.
This is new territory for me, but just from a finance point of view, as I hear initially, to prepare the plan falls on the jurisdictions, but the execution then will fall on the authorities, which presumably have the ability to finance. Is that kind of a broad?
Finance the capital.
If the plan develops a need or an action, then the authorities have to finance it, or the private water company.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
That is correct.
Eldon, can I just jump in real quick?
Please go right ahead.
So yeah, regarding the financials, and this is kind of conversations we've had with some legislators as well as with SHIP, is that we do feel that these studies are going to cost money. And so I think we are going to be looking to the 2024 General Assembly to try and get some money allocated from the General Assembly or from the general fund to DEQ, I guess, and then to the PDCs or whoever the authorities are for these plans. So that is definitely a plan to try and make sure that this isn't some kind of yet another, I guess, what we want to call unfunded mandate for that. There used to be grants, evidently, and those grants went away years ago for these plans. So that's my understanding.
I mean, there is authority within the statute for state funding, and there was back in the early days, in the pre-2010, I think. And Brent, if you're having discussions with folks, you may want to coordinate that with Chip and some of the others, because as Chip just said, with internal within VAPDC, they're talking about what it's going to take, and recognizing that these are on 10-year cycles, I would anticipate, and that's all I'm doing at this point because I have no hard discussions on this, that you're not going to be doing all of these plans, but for all 26 regions at the same time. You're going
No,
to
I think, and I've heard actually it's somewhere in writing that these will be staggered over a period of years. They'll do a few each year. As you're
Right.
saying, there won't be 26 being done at one time. They'll kind of stagger it over a period of from like now till 2028.
Brad, this is Norm. That's not my impression. There is an effective date and there is a requirement to have the plan submitted within a fixed period of time. There is a minor update that occurs every 5 years, and then there's a major update that occurs every 10 years. I don't see how this is going to get staggered because all of these plans are then fed into the DEQ plan, which is produced for the statewide plan. So staggering would not help DEQ whatsoever in this process. Eldon, on the grants, you're right. There was some money made available the last time around, but it was minuscule. It got nowhere near covering the cost of what a plan was needed for.
Yeah, we kind of followed the model of the implementation of the Chesapeake Bay Act. You know, I have and Deirdre, you get your hand up. Go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that Fauquier County being entirely dependent on wells, I hope whatever plan goes forward includes some element of public education. For example, I've been approached by citizens asking me like, well, how do I know how much water I have? And it's, you know, the classic answer is when you turn on the faucet and nothing comes out, well, you're out of water. There's no public concept of what the basic hydrogeology of the area is made up of. No understanding of how the well system actually works, and of course, we need the political will to go ahead and recognize the need and develop some plans for some alternative sources. So we are way behind the 8 ball as far as any plan goes. And of course, I'd welcome any political or public pressure of any sort that would help us move forward. So I'm surprised. I don't think there's anybody on this call from our planning department. It would be great to see somebody here from that group.
No, you don't have anybody today. You got your neighbors in Culpeper, and of course you've got the PDC.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that it's a huge concern. I've had random people approach me with questions. You're with Soil and Water. Tell me about my water. And I refer them to the USGS website, which effectively acknowledges the fact that we don't know nothing about nothing, or it's very tenuous.
What? Talk a little bit deeper on that. Oh God, that's terrible. Talk a little bit more about what data would be needed from your perspective.
Data with regard to our expanding population. And of course, as you know, during the pandemic, we had a lot of urban residents that moved to more rural areas. And they brought with them public or expectations of public services, which simply do not exist. I've had one woman ask me, I bought a new house. How can the county issue a building permit on a property that has an uncertain water supply or any other kind of public utility supply? So I guess we have well data. We have some data from different companies that have facilitated the expansion of subdivisions and development of that sort. But that does not address the larger picture of how the county is going to go forward with addressing what is apparently an inevitable population growth and still kind of hold the line, the apparent line, on reservoir development. As you know, several years ago, we were right on the cusp of a reservoir in the southern part of the county. There were geological issues associated with that and a lot of public resistance to it. And the common phrase was, if you build it, they will come. Well, apparently they came anyway. So I guess basic geological data, but it's so uncertain. We have a fractured subsurface geology where water collects in the crevices and cracks, and one leads into the other. In my neighborhood, the wells go from 200 feet to 1,500 feet deep within a quarter mile of one another. So it's extremely variable and uncertain. So the need for some defined public water supply is very apparent. And I'll fold up my soapbox.
Okay, no, that's good information. I want to return for just a moment to what was talked about relative to the cycle. Norm, you talked about how the local plans or the regional plans feed the state plan, and that presents a challenge to staggering the due dates of the regional plans. Is that a hard impediment in your mind, or is that something that because where I'm coming from, and I think you probably understand where I'm coming, I just don't see the affordability of trying to do 26 regional plans all at the same time. And it just doesn't make fiscal sense.
Since when is DEQ concerned about our fiscal?
Yeah, the DEQ is not, but DEQ's boss in the General Assembly is, because they're the ones that have to pass the budget. And if there's going to be clamoring across the state, hey, wait a minute, we need state help. This is a state mandate, unfunded state mandate. Then we need some. If we compare it to the wastewater side, if you'll remember a decade plus ago, and there was all the push to move to BNR, and the state said, okay, that's great. We got to get everybody on board. We're all going that direction, but we can't build all of them at the same time. One, there's enough money. And two, there isn't enough construction resources,
Right,
to do it all at the same time.
right.
And to me, this is kind of a similar situation.
Well, to some degree it is, but when you're only talking 26 as opposed to several hundred wastewater facilities, there's a big difference there. But the primary thing is like I said, is DEQ combines all of these regional plans, runs their own modeling work, and then comes up with the state water supply plan, which DEQ has to present to the General Assembly. And if you go to DEQ's website, you can see the latest plan that was submitted by DEQ to the GA. That's where the staggering becomes a problem, because at that point, DEQ makes it very difficult to put together a statewide plan when, let's say, Northern Virginia is 6 years out, and that's a huge chunk of the state water. So that's the problem. I don't remember any conversation whatsoever in the technical advisory committee meetings about staggering the plans.
I agree with you. I don't remember that either.
Yeah, so I'm not sure where Brent got that idea. There is an effective date, and the reg calls for the development of a plan within a period of time. Unfortunately, it's been so long since we had the TAC meetings that I can't even remember what that time frame is, but my suspicion is it's probably like 2 years. So yeah, this is not cheap. Okay, it is an unfunded mandate, and we've been calling that since the inception of this back in the original plan requirements. That's why we bill it separately at the commission, because it's above and beyond what we have to do. If my memory serves me correct, I believe we collect about $200,000 to do our plan. Now the requirements in this go around are more extensive than they were for the first plan. So it's, that's one of the reasons why we're still waiting to see what comes out in the final reg, because there was still some significant pushback in the TAC on some of the stuff that DEQ was asking for.
Right.
Many of us thought it was going well beyond what the reg called for. And there was a lot of personal interpretation by some DEQ folks who are no longer there in what was being written into the reg itself. So, I'm really curious to see what comes out in the wash in the end here. But this was going to be a little more daunting. Now, in terms of what DJ was talking about, in terms of the groundwater, this is primarily a surface water reg. However, with this last go around, there was a little more emphasis on groundwater. I was working with some of the folks at USGS a couple of years ago, trying to expand the monitoring network throughout the state, and it never went anywhere. It would probably be interesting to see if we could bring up those conversations again and get something in front of the GA, because groundwater is a huge, unknown for a lot of areas in the Commonwealth. If my memory serves me correct, Fauquier County did a really nice study a number of years ago on their groundwater supplies. It's something that the state has to do across the board. For those of you who haven't been around for a while, unlike Eldon and I, water supply planning in the Commonwealth of Virginia, back in its heydays, in the 50s and the 60s, was actually pretty significant. The state actually put a lot of money into its water supply planning, but then it went away completely. And it wasn't really until we had the droughts and the governor was starting to cut off some water that DEQ decided, well, I guess we need to stop paying attention to it. But unfortunately, the approach that the state took was to put it back on the backs of the localities and not really a state function. And then DEQ said, okay, since we have all these regional plans, we're just going to combine them together, do a little more math on them, and then we have our state plan. So the approach is actually, in my opinion, ass backwards, excuse my French, compared to what it really should be. And that's one of the reasons why I started having some conversations with some of the USGS groundwater folks who run the monitoring wells and that still exist in the state.
And Pat's got his hand up, but before I call on Pat, just a clarifying question, Norm. You said you collected about $200,000, and I think you meant in that from your localities to put the plan in. Right.
Yes,
okay.
it comes from localities.
Yeah,
and it's our basic population for our population based funding equation.
Right.
The more people you have, the higher amount, so on and so forth. So it's fairly evenly proportioned out, because again, the more people you have, the more data you got to collect, the more analysis you got to have, and of course, we work with all of the authorities at the same time.
Pat.
Yeah, I assume that this requirement is going to have to take account of climate change and mitigation and new sources of information. Does the mandate, the regs from DEQ, outline what the scope of the plan has to deal with in the database?
Well, as the reg is laid out, you have to project what your demand is going to be at some point of time in the future. I think we ended up around 2050 or 2060, if my memory serves me correctly. So once you calculate what that demand is, then you look at what your forecast is in terms of availability. And if there's a gap, that's where you have to develop your so-called plan to be able to meet that gap at that future point in time. Climate change was introduced into this regulation in terms of one of the factors that has to be incorporated into the planning function. So climate change is, should be addressed to some degree. Now, does it specifically tell you how? No, it doesn't. So you're going to have 26 different plans trying to figure out 26 different ways of addressing climate change.
Well, let's face it. I mean, this is an iterative process in terms of learning how to improve your planning capabilities. I mean, this is a big change towards regionalism from the original legislation and regulations, and it's going to present its challenges. And so Norm made a couple key points, and it caused me to recollect some of those regulatory advisory council meetings. The statute change in 2020, House Bill 542. If anybody wants to go look it up, it was Delegate Carr carried the bill. It really was surface water biased. And because it starts right off and says these plans should be primarily river basin focused, and those are my words, not the exact words from the statute, but that was the effect of it. And I do remember the issues being brought up in the TAC of, well, wait a minute, what about the localities such as Fauquier, which are almost completely completely groundwater based, but DEQ had to write regulations to meet the statute, the bill, and so if we identify, and here's one of the roles of this group advising the commission, if we identify that there should be additional statutory change to address a bias such as that within future reg revisions, that's the appropriate type of suggestions that we can make to the commission, because half the commission is made up of members of the General Assembly, and that's why they're there. And so and I see Brianna Heath just joined us, and sorry we had a little mix up on link information, but Brianna, we recorded this, and if you want to after the fact go back and listen to the discussion leading up to where you just popped in, you want to identify yourself to everybody.
Hi, I'm the environmental planner with the Northern Neck Planning District Commission.
And part of what we've been talking about, have any of your localities been talking about the impending changes to water supply planning? You've got, I think your region, what is it? Your Coastal Plain 1, Region 11, which is your 4 counties, as these new regs take effect. Any discussions been going on down that way at all?
Not that I've heard yet. But I'll definitely look more into it since this is going on. Okay,
and as I said to the rest of the group, the folks with DEQ, Weed and Clow, and Hannah Summers will be with the Rappahannock River Basin Commission meeting coming up that first Wednesday in December to talk about the implementation of the new regulations. Okay, we've identified some things that I want to be sure when the commission brings this up that they hear some very preliminary feedback that will cause them to talk about a little bit, and then probably ask questions back to us that we can get into as we reconvene next March, and we're about to take our holiday and General Assembly break from the meetings of this technical committee. Before I do a tick off of identifying what I've heard so far, Meredith has her hand up.
Sorry, Elton, I know it's getting towards the end, but I just hoped that I could maybe draw on some of the expertise in this group and ask a question related to the groundwater part of all of this. I know that we've mostly been talking about water supply planning as it relates to surface level, but I did notice in doing some digging around for something recently that the 1992 Act, I believe, of the Eastern Groundwater Management Act, it has the Eastern Groundwater Management Advisory Committee sunsetting in 2025. Is that something that we know whether there is a plan to kind of draw that into this new reg, or whether there is enabling legislation that will continue that group, or what the plan is as it relates to the groundwater management area?
I do not know the answer to that question. I don't know if anybody else here does.
Okay, I know that it's coming up, so I don't know if that's something that's been talked about.
Okay, well, that gives us 2 General Assembly sessions for any extension. That's the one coming up and the one after that.
Yeah, there was no discussion of it in the TAC whatsoever. None of the groundwater management areas were ever discussed.
And despite what Norm said about some of us having been around in the 50s and 60s, I was not around dealing with the General Assembly when that Groundwater Management Act in 1992 was passed. I was working at the local government level. So just to separate myself from the age of Mr. Norm Goulet. Okay, a couple things that I heard. We in no particular order. Concerns about cost. There is going to be a need for localities to obviously gear up. Localities are responsible, yet they're not the water supply providers in all cases. There is for lack of a better way of describing it, a surface water bias in the statute, and that can present some challenges for the localities that are groundwater dependent or largely groundwater dependent. And with that being the case, there's going to really need to be more basic geologic data, which is something that can be provided better by groups such as USGS and a broader area than just at the local or even regional level. And the USGS monitoring network may need some attention. Let's see, is some concern about demands on water supply as growth occurs, and that's both residential growth and industrial commercial. And I don't know if I'm actually going to drop the term data center. I don't think I'm going to need to at the River Basin Commission meeting, because I think there are plenty of elected officials that will drop that term. And what else did I miss in a quick summary of some high level, very preliminary concerns?
I think one, I would change that. There's some concern. I would say there's considerable concern amongst some folks about water planning and new uses coming into the region and how we're going to account for that. Probably more consternation in some sectors than others. And then the only other piece, and I know I've discussed this with you before, Eldon, is the ability of DEQ to put these plans together to do a basin-wide approach, like not a basin-wide approach, because I know that's not the legislative mandate here. But how are they going to take these? How does each individual regional plan talk to each other so that we're making sure that we have enough water for all of the beneficial uses into the future? as things rapidly change, especially inside the middle Rappahannock region.
Okay. Anybody got anything to add to that? Brent put forward. All right. As I said at the beginning, we were going to try to wrap this up in 1 hour. Sorry about that, Brianna. I appreciate everybody doing this. Be thinking about this topic. We will. I foresee the commission throwing this back to this group to have more detailed discussions as we go forward, which means we're probably going to be doing similar to what we did with solar and bringing other experts in to talk about some of these issues and others that we identify or others that the commission identifies. Any other observations for the good of the cause?
I'll just have to put a plug in for the importance of agriculture in our particular community and balancing the growth aspects with regard to population and commercial growth versus support for our agricultural community.
Deidre, you hit on another key point here. One of the shortcomings of this mess, as I like to call it, is the lack of availability on the agricultural side. The cutoff point where a farmer has to report its withdrawals to DEQ is pretty significant, and that data availability is scant. So you hit on another key point that we tried to talk about in the meeting, but DEQ wasn't really very receptive on it whatsoever.
Thank you, Norm.
Part of that, Norm, as I remember, was that in order to get greater data, it would be greater reporting requirements on the farmer.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's that chicken and egg thing.
Right.
You know, we don't want to impose on the farmers, because of the reporting requirements, et cetera, privacy, et cetera. Understandably, completely understand that. Yeah. But at the same time, we're hurting ourselves by not having that data availability. I can tell you firsthand, personally, that when we try to model the Cedar Run portion of the Occoquan Reservoir, which has a fair amount of ag in it, our model just goes bananas because it's not seeing the water that it theoretically should be seeing. And the only thing that we can come up with is water withdrawals on the ag side that are unreported.
Yeah, I would agree with both Deirdre and Norm that this is a big issue, and I've heard a lot about it from our farmers with the drought that we've had this summer. They've definitely felt it for sure, and this is something that we're not capturing at all in these water supply plans, and they, have never had a seat at the table in these discussions. And I echo Deirdre's concern about groundwater needs to be a major focus in some of the localities, because if they don't incorporate groundwater into their water supply plans, then the plan, it doesn't count for anything.
I know that on our end of things, since we're more towards the bay, especially for farmers, the saltwater encroachment is an issue as well.
Thank you. Good point. Okay. Thank you. This is going to give me a few things that as we move into the discussion phase after the presentation by DEQ at the commission meeting, I can raise some points, initial points coming from this technical committee that will be food for thought for commission members. And folks, that takes care of this technical committee for 2023. Thank you. Many of you have been on, some of you have been on all of these. We'll be back in March of 24. I expect this is going to be a big part of our discussions. and anything else that commission members come up with that they want us to talk about, and remembering that we're going to have about a dozen new commission members, so no telling where that may go. And with that, thank you, everybody. Have a great holiday season. I'm sure I'll see some of you or in other venues. Thanks so much.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Alden.
you. Bye.
Bye.